We all navigate a strict psychological tension, the gap between the face we show the world and the self we keep hidden. In the 20th century, psychiatrist Carl Jung gave this social mask a formal name, the persona. It is the conscious ego personality we develop to interface with society. Behind it lies what Jung called the shadow. This contains the ego-dystonic elements of the psyche, the impulses and emotions we actively repress because they are deemed socially unacceptable. In classical psychoanalysis, deploying a persona is viewed as a necessary, universal mechanism for social affiliation and navigating everyday group dynamics. To function in a complex social hierarchy and avoid marginalization, this division is a practical requirement. Today, this classical concept intersects with a growing clinical focus on what the community calls masking. Where depth psychology treats the social mask as a standard adaptive tool, modern clinical data links neurodivergent masking to severe psychological decay, burnout, and trauma. A 2021 study by researchers Miller, Rees, and Pearson provides the empirical framework to understand this disparity in outcomes. Their research gathered qualitative data on masking experiences across 3 distinct adult cohorts: autistic individuals, neurodivergent individuals without an autism diagnosis, and neurotypicals. By mapping the responses across these groups, we can locate exactly where universal social identity management crosses the line into a neurobiologically destructive mechanism. The qualitative data initially reveals a striking overlap in the baseline behaviors all 3 groups use to manage their social identities. This chart outlines 7 core themes. Looking at the primary mechanisms of masking, the strategies are identical. Theme 1, External Manifestations, describes adapting what observers see. Autistic and non-autistic individuals reported using mimicry, scripting, and altering clothing to blend in. The primary driver is stigma avoidance. People monitor their environment and adjust their behavior to signal alignment with the group. These shared strategies map perfectly onto the traditional psychological model of the persona. Adopting a non-native social communication style requires conscious cognitive effort from the individual. At a structural level, basic masking operates as a universal human survival tactic to prevent external marginalization, regardless of a person's neurotype. The study also tracked the internal consequences of maintaining this facade, categorized under Theme 2, Internal Identity and Loss. Across all groups, participants reported that sustained masking creates a profound fracture in their sense of self, leaving them alienated from their true identity. This identity fracture requires continuous energy. Theme 3 catalogs the heavy physical and mental exhaustion reported by all cohorts as a direct result. This empirical data mirrors Jung's original warnings regarding the persona. Jung argued that identifying too heavily with the social mask causes a loss of the ego, creating a dissociated, unstable subpersonality. The psychological cost of the mask is universally high, transforming the protective persona into a pressurized, exhausting shadow. While the structural mechanics of masking appear universal, the underlying physiological demands vary. We must isolate the regulatory mechanisms diverging strictly within the autistic cohort. A comparative matrix shows themes 1, 2, and 3 populate evenly across all 3 groups. However, theme 4, neurotype nuances, emerges exclusively in the autistic set. This includes sensory suppression, the suppression of stimming for neurobiological regulation, and reliance on explicit memory systems. The autistic mask requires the continuous, active suppression of foundational neuroregulatory systems. This neurotype-specific cognitive load directly drives extreme clinical outcomes. When we re-examine the resource strain of Theme 3 exclusively through the autistic lens, the severity scales up dramatically. Severe autistic burnout is correlated directly to the inability to maintain this unique regulatory suppression. Stripped of their natural regulation tools like stimming, the autistic group cited relying on dangerous alternative coping mechanisms, including restricted eating and substance abuse. The data isolates a specific correlation exclusively in the autistic cohort between mandatory masking obligations, autistic meltdowns, and suicidal ideation. The escalation of these consequences demonstrates that autistic masking operates as a distinct, higher-stakes phenomenon than standard social identity management. This masking deployment is triggered by an environmental stressor. The constant threat is social stigma and dehumanization for displaying autistic traits. This creates a double-bind feedback loop, a structural trap of stigma management. If the individual drops the mask, they face immediate external repercussion and marginalization. If they maintain the mask, they block the external attack, but sever a critical internal connection. This severed feedback loop governs interoception, the vital neurological ability to sense, process, and regulate one's own physical and emotional distress. Without interoceptive awareness, the individual loses the ability to recognize their own distress signals, allowing internal system pressure to build until catastrophic failure occurs. The mask acts as an inescapable, trauma-driven social survival strategy that protects the individual externally while dismantling them internally. The core mechanism of the autistic mask is not just exhaustion, it is a complete systemic failure driven by this severe interoceptive disconnect. For the autistic neurotype, deploying a persona does not mean hiding eccentricities or socially undesirable traits. It forces the complete suppression of physiological and emotional regulatory mechanisms vital for baseline stability. This highlights the strict difference between standard social fatigue experienced by neurotypicals and the burnout experienced by autistic individuals. Autistic burnout manifests as a total systemic collapse caused by chronic psychological disassociation from the core self. Classical depth psychology provides the vocabulary for this disassociation, but empirical neurodiversity research establishes the biological stakes. Treating autistic burnout requires moving past behavioral modification to directly address the trauma of a suppressed neuroregulatory system.